My name is Mike Baer. I work in the personnel office at Gallaudet University, and I'm a graduate student at the University of Maryland. I'd like to discuss a paper I wrote in one of my first semester classes at Maryland on the topic of illiteracy. And instead of fingerspelling the word, I'm going to use this sign for illiteracy. Illiteracy is a serious problem in American society today, and has been for thousands of years. But it has not been recognized until recently because of dramatic changes in technology. If we look at the years since World War II, say the past 50 years, and compare the changes in technology with the 50 years preceding World War II, we can see how technology has increased. We have computers, television, we have an explosion of communication and information sharing. And this new technology demands that people be literate and be able to read and write well in order to access this technology. My job in the personnel office has helped me see this as well because I interview applicants with low literacy skills, both deaf and hearing. And I will address the topic of literacy in the deaf community later on. People who are literate, who have good skills reading and writing English, will succeed. Whereas those who are illiterate and don't have such skills are not going to succeed in the job market. And try as we might to help these people, they're friendly, they're courteous, they're motivated, but they just don't have the literacy skills necessary to meet the needs of the departments here at Gallaudet. And so we need to hire people who have good literacy skills. And it's with this framework in mind that I decided to write this paper and try and find out some of the causes of illiteracy. In America today, 1 out of every 3 persons is illiterate. That's 33% of the American population who cannot read and write, even at a 2nd or 3rd grade level. But it's a problem that's virtually invisible. For 1 year, the U.S. Department of Labor kept statistics on the amount of time lost by companies who were required to send their employees to on-the-job training or training for new technology and so forth. And these companies lost over $200 million in time off the job trying to upgrade the skills of their employees. The United Nations has tested the literacy of approximately 150 countries worldwide, and the United States is 49th in this list. Even though we have this technological boom in America, we don't have the people who are literate enough to access and use these new technological breakthroughs. Businesses' productivity is on the decline because we cannot find enough qualified literate workers. And this is a trend that may continue. Now, if we look at the Japanese culture, they're far ahead of the United States because they place a great deal of emphasis on education and literacy. And again, research shows that the United States is in the process of losing its economic strength in the global market to Japan because of this problem of illiteracy. And we may not be the global power that we once were. So many things now have to do with electronics, cars, microwaves, VCRs, and so forth. Japan is excelling in their highly literate culture while we here in the United States are not. There's been a lot of debate on who's to blame, the business community, the government, or the educational system. The business community faults the school because they see the students for so much of their lives. The educational system blames the government for not supporting them financially. And from my experience, I think they should each share the blame, and they should work together to reduce the problem. Over the past 10 years, we've seen more coalitions among the 3 organizations being devised. For example, Project Plus, which stands for Project Literacy United States. More and more organizations are developing such programs in order to prevent the United States losing its power in the world marketplace. Let's see. Oh, what was I going to say? I was ready to say something very important here. Well, let me pick up. My feeling is the government should stay out of this. I saw a quote in an article that said, a government's job is to govern, not to run the system. You know, that's how our governmental system is based, on the government governing, but also traditionally being involved with both our social and civil systems. And I think that the government needs to stay out of business and education in attempting to solve the problem of illiteracy. There's so much bureaucracy and red tape to go through to try and get anything done. So I think the government should not be involved, but yet support the efforts of the coalitions through funding. You know, we pay taxes for such purposes. And I think the government should leave it up to the business community and the educational system to solve this problem. As businesses develop new technologies, they need to keep the educational system abreast of them so that this technology can be introduced to the students. Educators often are not familiar with what's happening in the business community, and they don't have time to go out to the private sector and see what kind of advances are being made technologically, resulting in a lack of communication between the two. So a stronger relationship must be created between the business world and the educational system. And I think it's the government's place to foster that through funding and support. And in that way, we can regain our economic power in the world again. And now, with the destruction of communism and the talk of the new unified Europe in the next few years, where several countries such as France, Italy, Germany will unify to form one common European economic community, they may threaten the place of Japan or the United States in the economic market. That's a very hot issue that's going to remain so for a long time. Now let's see how this issue relates to education of the deaf. I see one main issue is the ASL English controversy. Last fall, the superintendent from the Mississippi School for the Deaf gave a presentation which I found very inspiring. He said that one problem was the lack of deaf professionals involved in education of the deaf, especially in decision-making and teaching, that there were not enough deaf people, resulting in the fact that hearing administrators and teachers were making decisions about the best methods of teaching the deaf and how to work with deaf children. And he felt that it's our responsibility to have input into these decisions that will affect deaf people. But we look at deaf people today, they're going into business and other careers, not into education. I'm an example of this, but we need to see more and more deaf people going back into education. Another problem is the issue of language. For many deaf people, English is our second language, and that's a problem that we need to live with and to address as well. And also, American Sign Language, he felt, was the key to literacy. Many schools or state educational systems do not recognize ASL as a viable language, and that is a continuing struggle that we must face. So it puts us in a double bind. Research also shows that companies are now hiring people with bachelor's degrees and above. I tend to equate a current bachelor's degree with a high school diploma of a few years ago. Companies need creative thinkers and problem solvers, and I think are going to need people who have an MA or a PhD. And if you look at the numbers of people who have such degrees, maybe only 5 to 10% of the American population have bachelor's degrees, and an even smaller percentage of deaf people have college degrees. Many deaf people have only a high school diploma or are themselves high school dropouts. So that's something that deaf leaders in the educational system and the National Association of the Deaf must address. We must come up with programs to improve the literacy skills of the deaf community to a certain minimum so that deaf people can access the economic and job markets in this country. If we do nothing, we need to think about what's going to happen in the future. For example, many of these technological changes happen virtually overnight. And if we're not prepared to face these changes, then this problem is going to remain serious for many years to come. I've been asked to talk about what the superintendent of the Mississippi school recommended as far as solutions, and he had several recommendations, and I'll talk about a couple of them. One is to look at consistency in programs to train teachers of the deaf. We have 70 to 80 such programs nationwide, but no consistency in a theoretical framework or methodology for preparing teachers. Some support the use of signed English, others are more orally based, others look at ASL as a structural framework. So consistency is important in these programs. Another recommendation is to have deaf people very involved in the local school systems and with the government in different capacities, teaching, decision-making, and so on. Superintendent also gave a good example of this. He told of going to a meeting in California, a teachers' meeting, where he was one of 20 teachers in a discussion room. He was the only deaf person with 19 hearing teachers. And among that group, they had between them approximately 400 years of collective experience teaching the deaf. He had successfully produced 5 good teachers of the deaf from his former students, while the other 19 teachers had produced none. Where are teachers of the deaf and deaf students? And he was not there to fault them as teachers, but to look at training programs and the need to make their methodology and conceptualization very consistent. Another example he gave, he was presenting a lecture to another group, and after he was finished, a hearing teacher approached him in tears and said how she wished she had been aware of ASL in the past. His lecture had been about American Sign Language, and she said that her program of teacher education had prepared her to use a signed English system. And she was very angry, and he said to direct that anger at the training program, not at deaf people or at herself, because that's where the basic problem lies. And in his view, Gallaudet needs to take the lead in this area, not to try and maintain a neutral attitude, but to take the lead and not try and please everyone. He said Gallaudet should be a model to the world as far as education and preparation of teachers of the deaf, and Gallaudet needs to have a say. And in my opinion, ASL is a key part of this philosophy. What Gallaudet does, he feels the world will follow. If Gallaudet does not practice or take a stand, then this inconsistency in preparation of teachers of the deaf will continue. So it's a topic that's of strong interest to me and something that I want to get involved with and spread the word among colleagues of mine, not only among the Gallaudet community, but among the grassroots community as well. It is a serious problem that must be addressed. Literacy skills are very important in order for people to have a good quality of life. And if there are deaf people that we can locate who have literacy skills, perhaps they can help other deaf people develop them. And it's something we're going to need to work on for the next 10 or 15 years.